Yo yo yo, I am back once again, and today I am here to talk about Honkai Star Rail's erudition problem. And I'm sure most people watching this know that erudition characters currently are not the best in the game. And, well, it's kind of obvious why. Erudition characters are meant to be dealing with hordes of enemies, groups of enemies. They're not really supposed to specialize in single target damage. They really but but the issue with that is most content in the game is single target focused. And so I went and I did some math to see just how much they really struggle with uh single target damage. So I picked the erudition character who I'm pretty sure has the highest single target potential damage in the game, being Jing Yuan, and I decided to compare him against both versions of Dan Heng, both Imbibitor and the original, just to sort of compare damage numbers. So, like I did with my Ho Ho compared to Luocha video, I did all the math is on my phone. I have it all written out. So let's sort of start by going over the different values that the characters are playing with. We have Jing Yuan, his skill at level. So also, by the way, all the numbers I'm doing are based off of E0. That includes even E0 base Dan Heng, even though he's only a 4-star. Because even with that, it's still kind of surprising how well he does. So, as I was saying, let's get. So that means there's level 10 being the max for the skill, talents, and ult. So, Jing Yuan's skill. And one final thing before I get into the numbers. This is about single target damage. So, if something is AoE, that's not being taken into account, because I'm comparing single target damage. Jing Yuan's skill, 95% attack. His ult does 200% attack, and his talent deals 66% attack per stack, up to a maximum of 10. So this is in calculating his the damage he does with his Lightning Lord is a little bit interesting, because there's a max of 10 stacks, and every time he uses his skill, he gains 2 stacks, and every time he uses his ult, he gains 3 stacks, with a passive 3 as the base. So if he does nothing, his talent will do 3 hits. If he uses his skill, his talent will do 5 hits. If he uses his skill and his ult, his talent will do 8 hits. The only way to get 10 hits with his talent is either use his technique to enter battle, or to have someone like Bronya move his action forward in the turn, so he outspeeds and his Lightning Lord at that point to be able to do a second skill. But yeah. So with all that in mind, if Jing Yuan has a turn where he's not able to ult, not able to get a second skill off, he'll end up doing a total of 425% of his attack in damage. With his ult, without a second use of his skill, so only 8 stacks of Lightning Lord, ends up doing 823% of his attack as damage. And with his ult, and with whether his technique or a Bronya advancing his turn forward, or like Asta's ult might be able to give him enough speed. I'm not exactly sure. That'll do 955% of his attack as damage. That is quite substantial for an erudition character, and he's kind of an outlier with erudition characters. I probably should have done Serval as well, but I'm trying to give erudition the best chance they can have, and Jing Yuan kind of is that. He's the closest thing to a destruction character in the erudition class, but 955 is his very peak damage he can do, and he needs a lot of help to get that. He needs a Bronya, or he needs to use his technique to enter battle. He needs help. He can't do it on his own, and the fact he can't do it on his own efficiently is something you need to keep in mind when I'm going through the other characters. So I'm going to go on to Dan Heng, the 4-star version right now, because I want to save Imbibitor Lune for last, because that was a lot of math, and I want to kind of go over all the math that went into that last, so that way I don't bore people halfway through the video. Because I enjoy math. Not everyone else enjoys math. I know a lot of people hate math. I'm a nerd. I like math. So let's just get into 4-star Dan Heng, because this is very, very easy. His skill does 260% attack. His ult does 400% attack. But if the target is slowed, it's increased to 520% attack. That means, so with just a skill, if he does an ult, the turn is 260%, which is quite a bit lower than Dan Heng. Then Jing Yuan, my bad, misspoke. Skill with his ults is 660%. That is already quite a bit. That is already more than, it's like in between Jing Yuan with no ults and Jing Yuan with his ults. And, oh yeah, another thing to keep in mind is Jing Yuan's damage is spread out between his actions and the Lightning Lord's actions. So it's not all immediate like you can be with Dan Heng's here. And Dan Heng, with his ults and his skill, and the target is slowed from some source, brings the damage all the way up to 780% of his attack. And as a 4-star character, being able to do just about 50% attack less than a 5-star character who's used their skill, who's used their ults, is kind of insane to me. How much damage the 4-star Dan Heng is able to do. It really does make me, like, on paper, able to do. And another thing to keep in mind with these Dan Heng numbers, I'm not calculating the wind penetration from his talents, because I'll be honest, I don't know how to calculate that into the math, because I would need to know the average wind resistance of the enemies, as well as enemies with wind weakness, without wind weakness. It would be very, very difficult to calculate how much damage his talent would be giving. So that is not calculated into the math. So that 780% damage, attack damage, could skyrocket substantially higher if the wind resistance penetration is brought into account. But now it's time for Lune. This is quite a bit, but I'll get to the quite a bit of math in a second. We have his talent, which is every time one of his abilities hits a target, all of his abilities are multi-hit, so keep that in mind. He gains a stack. Every stack gives him 10% damage, up to a maximum of 60%. So, yeah, I'll get to that in a bit. His attack, his three skill point attack, which is what I'm using, because if you're using it in Bibder Lune, you're exclusively using that attack. You're never using the 2, 1, or 0 skill point attack. Hits 7 times and deals 500% attack. So you're thinking, okay, 500% attack. That's not a lot. That is less than Jing Yuan with his ults. But the 500% attack is very misleading, because it's not taking into account the talents increasing the damage of every subsequent hit 6 times. So, for instance, for the math, now I'm going to start talking about math for a second. If you don't like math, I'm sorry. Like, comment, subscribe, all that nonsense. But if you don't like math, skip forward ahead in the video to the end. I will try to add timestamps in the bottom to skip the math. If I can learn how to do that. I've never done timestamps, but yeah. So, with every hit of his attack adding 10% damage, to calculate how much total damage the attack is doing, what I did is I had to make an assumption here. I had to assume that every single hit of the attack is dealing equal amounts of damage. So with it being 500% attack over 7 attacks, it ended up coming down to about 71.428 percent attack per hit. I rounded that down to 71.4 to make my life a lot easier. So the numbers will end up being slightly lower than they actually would be in game, depending on how the game rounds damage. So rather than it being 71.4 times 7 times, the damage ends up being 71.4 plus 71.4 times 1.1 plus 71.4 times 1.2, 71.4 times 1.3, 71.4 times 1.4, 71.4 times 1.5, up to, you do that 6 times, so it ends up being, so the final numbers end up being 71.4, 78.54, 85.68, 92.82, 99.96, 107.21, and 114.24, for a total attack of 649.74. That is, his talents on its own is increasing the attack of his skill by about 25%. Yeah, 25. 30%? 20% of 500 is 100. And then half of that is 50. So yeah, about 25%. My brain had a brain fart for a second there. So that just his skill, no ult involved, just his skill ends up being more than Dan Heng with his ult and his skill. But if you want to get to some absolutely insane numbers, we'll take his ult into account. With his ult being 3 hits of with a total of 300% attack, I did the same assumption where every hit is the same, so it ended up being 100 plus 110 plus 120. So now we're already at 3 stacks of his talents. So that means when we take into account his attack, we can skip the 71.4, 78, and 85 and jump straight to the 92.8, 99.6, 99.96, I should say, and 107.1. And that's only, and so 3 out of the 7 hits of his attack bring us up to the maximum stacks of his talents, so leaving us with 4 more hits of his 7 hits to be at 114.24. That gives us a total damage of 1,086.84% attack on just his, with using his ults and then his skill. Keep in mind, this is at E0, and any amount of idle, even just E1, drastically increases his damage. But I'm not talking about idleness here. And one thing to really keep in mind, because something I mentioned earlier when talking about Jing Yuan, for Jing Yuan to reach his maximum damage of 955, that sounds very close. It's only like 100, little over 100% attack off of the Embittered Lunae. But to get that, he needs skill, ults, and either Bronya to advance his action forward to be able to get a second skill, meaning he cannot, or he needs to enter with this technique. So in a drawn out fight, he can only ever do this, either do his 955 with the assistance of a support, meaning that same support could be supporting an Embittered or Lunae, or it could be assisting even like a Dan Heng. A 4-star Dan Heng could do more instantaneous damage than Jing Yuan can. With Jing Yuan, you end up having to wait for for the Lightning Lord, which in that time of waiting, you can just die. You can lose. And this is an issue that a lot of Erudition characters have. A lot of their damage is never front loaded. It's always back loaded damage, whether it be Herta's spin, Himiko's drone strike from weakness breaks, Serval's shocks. It's never front loaded damage, it's always back loaded, while destruction and hunt characters tend to have very front loaded damage. Meaning that when it comes, they're really good at finishing off bosses when they show up. But yeah. I think that's everything I really want to talk about. Sort of going over some numbers I did, some math I did. I enjoy doing math. I like comparing the numbers of characters and seeing what is this character good at, what is this character good at, and can this character who's seen as bad be good if their numbers are good enough. If you like the video, again, like, comment, subscribe, all of that nonsense. And uh, if you have any other characters you want me to, trying to get my cat's attention. If you have any other characters you want me to compare number wise, feel free to ask, and I'll do it. Until next time, adios. Say goodbye to my cat as well. If you acknowledge he exists, he'll be your best friend. And if you leave a comment saying hi Mahode, he will be happy.